So that really well covers the properties that we wanted to talk about in terms of hardware. So from a software point of view, we basically did the same thing, and we've broken them down and categorized the information for software. So for software, we are talking about software assets, but it becomes a little bit more complicated when it comes to managing your software. There's so many areas of software asset management that need to be looked at. So not only are you going to keep track of what you're discovering, you will keep track of what you've purchased, and then you'll keep track of the contracts associated to it. So there's really multiple areas of importance within software asset management. And to add, software asset management isn't like doing hardware asset management where you're just dealing with lists of physical entities with attributes. You're dealing more with contracts. So you're keeping track of lists of software assets you own, but you now have to relate that back to the entitlement that comes with the agreements that you've signed, or that when you purchase software, you're following terms and conditions. So software is that much more complicated. It is tied more to the contractual aspects of managing assets versus the keeping track of where they are and how they're being deployed. I mean, that part of it is important as well, but by far, the concept of compliance and following entitlement just adds to the complexity. So the properties that you'll need to capture will reflect that as well. So here in identification, we're talking about software titles and versions. So giving you basically a list of the titles that you want to manage, but also about manufacturer part numbers, which will tell you what you've actually purchased. So through that part number, you can then go back and trace, what you've bought, how you can use it, and what you're entitled to use it for. License information will then help you determine what you're entitled, or your entitlement. So, how many you've bought, what type of asset is it? Is it a base license, or is it an upgrade license? What versions you're entitled to in terms of upgrades and downgrades. License unit, is it user-based? Is it device-based? Is it concurrent user? Is it by PVU, by core? There's so many different license units that now things become more complex, because for each one of those vendors you're dealing with, you need to understand what you are entitled to, and vendors will and have changed their entitlements over time as well. So you have to be on top of this thing. Right. Cost center information, department information, license keys, all that stuff goes towards the license. The financial information is also important to be able to validate that you've bought and that you own the software that you've purchased. So for POs, invoices, suppliers, cost, current value, depreciation, so on. Agreements, so the overall license agreement, maintenance and support that's tied to it as well. I mean, this is information you will keep track of. Then we get into, not only do you capture, what's being used, you're capturing what you're entitled to, but now you're going to start capturing how it's supposed to be used, so who it's assigned to and what device is assigned to. So once you start capturing this information, you're in a better position to say, okay, what have I bought? Who's using it? And, and I'm managing it, so it's important, so I can then keep track. So there's different aspects that need to be considered, and these properties all fit into that. Take management one step further. You can start allocating blocks of licenses out to cost centers and departments. But again, that will really depend on the objectives that you're trying to attain. And then lastly, usage statistics. Now you can get statistics from different applications. SCCM provides you with some of that, but you will be interested in knowing how it's being used, how often. Concurrent licenses, are you hitting, are you maximizing your concurrent licenses ever? If you are, then maybe you need more licenses, and if you're not, maybe you've got too many. So really the usage is really to help you then manage that information more accurately. So we'll just take a couple of minutes to look at each property and what you're getting back in return in terms of your objectives, similarly to what we did with hardware. So if you're tracking your titles, your versions, it'll allow you to actually manage your software down to a title and a version. If you're not tracking your entitlements, your assignments at the version level, then you really can't do anything at the version level. So it's just common sense that you need to track it by version if you want to be able to report by version. Software entitlement, you know, keeping track of what you've purchased, if it's an upgrade or a downgrade, and over multiple acquisitions. Manufacturer part number, as I mentioned, is a really useful tool to go back to the vendor and say, listen, this is what I bought, and what can I do with it? So it goes towards knowing what you own, your software compliance, your vendor management, and also software license compliance. Oh, I said that twice. Your license units, obviously, right? You keep track of if they're assigned to users, to devices, to cores, to concurrent users. Maintenance and support, again, maintenance and support is really important to be able to track what you've bought. When you buy software, normally you're buying it based on software you've purchased in the past, and sometimes that's one of the difficulties of getting the software information, is really tracking back through time to know what you actually purchased. The vendor will tell you what you own based on their records, but sometimes, you know, if there is a discrepancy, how do you track that, and how do you contest and prove? So in order for you to be able to prove what you own, you have to keep track of it. And with software, you need to be tracking it over time. You know, you've bought a version, you've upgraded again, you've bought maintenance. That maintenance entitles you to versions, and then you've bought more maintenance. And you know, if you look over time at any of your software products that you've purchased, you know, you will need to walk through the various items that you've purchased and the information.
And just one quick point, just to remind you of the overlap between software and hardware asset management. Just one simple example of where the physical asset is geographically that is running the software. For example, you're going to have some software applications that have rights of use that are geographically based, and if your people are moving based on a job change, particularly for multinationals that may be on the call, this is a significant consideration. So you do need to properly manage hardware and key points that have a direct relationship to the compliance of your software assets.
Yep. Always tie it back to your objectives. Users, obviously, assigning the assets to users. I mean, this is again tied to your process. You know, a request comes in for software, you approve it, you assign it. When you do your discovery, it's a validation, right? You're finding software on somebody's device. You can check your assignment, and yes, they're authorized to use it. If they're not authorized to use it, then you need to look at process, has it broken down, and then assess whether that person still needs the software, and then giving you the information you can then use to do your harvesting and to maximizing your use and reuse of software. So again, they all have a role within achieving your objectives. So as I did with hardware, I created some spreadsheets. Let me just bring that spreadsheet up. I'll do this a different way. Here we go. In terms of software, as I mentioned, it is a little bit more complicated. So in this case here, I've created 4 tabs within this Excel spreadsheet. So I'm looking at software, entitlement, usage, and assignment. So keeping track of the information again in spreadsheets. And then again, from an access point of view, showing it to you, and I'm just going to, here, I'll close out this and just reopen it, and then we can do basically the same thing with software. So if we start with the software title, and then, software types gives you there's no relationship there, so let me just get rid of that. Let's see what else, our versions, right? Oh, for some reason my relationships are not showing up. There is a relationship between these two. It's somehow disappeared. And then your agreements. Oh, something had to go wrong.
There's a ghost in your computer.
Yeah, so somehow my relationships have been removed. Let's see if there's anything else in here. Purchase order for entitlement. There we go.
There's one.
So we got an entitlement record, and it's tied to purchase order information. It's also probably tied to companies, right?
There we go.
You got some showing up. So same approach. You define the objects that you have. You identify the relationship. Again, thinking of databases to maximize them. You create there's the third normal form or something along that line to maximize not only the information but to reduce the repetition of data. So that's one of the important things with databases. All right. So when it comes to populating data, data is data. Once we've identified the source and what we want to do with it, we really now have to take it from one object or from one form and bring it into our repository, maybe the CMDB or a SQL database. It's been done. It's been done a lot. It's taking data, transforming it, and the approach that's typically taken is an ETL approach, where it's more about extract, transform, and load. And then so the ETL approach, extract, transform, and load. And one thing to be aware of when it gets to that point where you're actually taking data from one system to the other, to not underestimate the effort that it takes to get the data from source to destination, especially on the initial deployment. There's so much data that's being manipulated and looked at during the initial deployment. The effort to do the transformation is first of all iterative and will take time. So take it through a life cycle of initiation, finding your reference data, validating, transforming, staging, reviewing, and then when you're happy with it, then publishing it. And if you're not happy with it, then you start again and you tweak, you extract, transform, load, and then when you're satisfied, then move on to the next step.
Can you just talk a minute about, on some of the forums, we've seen some people commenting on how, like, oh my gosh, people are still using spreadsheets like they have no value. And they play a role. It's not a matter of COTS versus you graduate from Excel spreadsheets and you never use those again. Can you just talk about, how that fits into the ETL approach as well? Yeah,
the spreadsheets actually do become quite handy when you're actually doing the validation. So instead of staging it all the way to your final repository, that staging may be, in Excel form where it makes it easier to actually validate the data. And the reality is, IT asset management data is in spreadsheets. It's everywhere. Again, it depends on the maturity, but even when you become standardized, there's still the remnants of people keeping track of lists. And Excel being the tool that it is, that's universal, and people can do incredible things with it. From pivot tables to from formulas to pivot tables, and just to creating ad hoc reports quickly. The data is out there in spreadsheet form. So definitely that is one of the sources of data. And also a good tool to get to where you want to get. So if we look at each one of these steps individually, when we talk about extract, we're really talking about how do I get to the data, what format will it be in, permissions, are there permissions tied to the data, is it a one-time, is it a 5-time extract, during initial data population, or is it something that can be automated and reliably delivered? So key points in terms of extract. Transform is really like I said, the place where you're going to be spending most of your effort. So identifying your common identifiers so you can connect data from multiple sources and create complementary versus base information. Consistent formats, very important if you are going to automate the loading of data, that you have consistent dates and numbers and strings and so on. Definitely lookup lists are the way to go to get the data first of all into a database, and minimizing 5 ways of or typing the same information. But also from a usability point of view going forward within the tool, having people select or pick from lists as opposed to having free-form text where they're typing things in. And again, creating data that needs to be validated and cleaned up. So lookup lists are very important. Multi-use fields are also an issue during import, that if you're getting data from sources where 5 different data items are stored in the description field, well, it makes it difficult to take data out of a description field and make use of it in an automated way. Transforming obviously is the key activity where you're taking coded values and creating relationships or finding other information. Cleaning up data and removing notes and just text that you historically use within spreadsheets to maybe represent a blank field, or a blank field is a blank field. You don't need to actually say it's a blank field. Rolling up multiple records into one, as well as transposing a single record into multiple records if it's needed. So again, the transformation is really where you're going to spend most of your effort. Loading it is quite simple. Once you get to the load, you're basically got data, you're satisfied with it, it's accurate, and you're going to then decide, if I'm going to use it to create new records, update existing records, maybe even delete records that are already in a repository that I'm trying to create. Definitely exception handling and reporting goes a long way during this phase. Tools and utilities available out there. There's lots of different tools. If you're dealing straight with SQL, well, you can use SQL. Data destination, database schemas, you must be familiar with them to get data in, but you can also use stored procedures and functions and whatever to help with maybe the transformation of the data going through. COTS provided import utilities. Obviously, SCCM is a good example. They've got an import connector and basically helping you take CSV files and bring the data into that repository. The other COTS applications have their preferred way of getting data into the repository, some making it easier than others. So they're often tied back to one-time tasks, whether you can schedule them and you can automate them through runbooks and through Orchestrator and through whatever else. You can also make use of PowerShell. PowerShell is very much in the news these days in terms of how it's going to be used going forward within the Microsoft stack. It has been, and now it's being used more from a management point of view for, there's Service Manager automation and so on. But PowerShell and the commandlets tied to Service Manager help you actually formulate or format the data, providing a level of abstraction yet again, allowing you to automate them, tie them to tasks, and to incorporate into your ITAM procedures. Now, on that note, what I wanted to show you is doing some of that within Service Manager. So you'll notice here, it's back to where we were before. I have my 5 assets, and if you look at some of the tasks over on the right, I've created a couple of them. Export refresh candidates and import hardware assets. And the import hardware assets is really the one tied towards getting data into the repository. And all I've done here is I've taken a PowerShell script and basically built a front end in front of it so that you can go and pick, a CSV file. If I open this CSV file and just with Notepad, you can see it's just a CSV with a lot of data in it. But this this import template or this PowerShell script will basically help you select it and then actually process it. So it does a level of validation, give you some feedback, and then basically calls the connector, the Service Manager connector, to do the import. And it's telling me it's done. It tells me to close it. It's completed. Now when I do my refresh, you'll notice I've got more than 5 records within my repository. So taking the CSV and quickly turning around. PowerShell is powerful. It could also be used to do some of that transformation. So taking data, doing lookups, maybe even referencing other databases while it's preparing the data to bring it in and to automate it.
So again, a reminder that if you have invested in a COTS solution that's native to Service Manager, the same approach could be applied to that solution with its own particular classes, etc. Yep.
And we've put a couple of videos out in our website that talk about export these two actual PowerShell scripts. The other one that's out there as well is the export. And then basically all this does is it allows you to specify what your end of life period is, and it'll tie it back to information that's on the hardware asset, giving you also the ability to say where you want the exported file to go. So it's creating a CSV file. What you do with that CSV file, I mean, you could do 100 things. You could open it up in Excel and create an ad hoc report as quickly as that, pivot tables, the whole works. but just to show you that PowerShell is quite a useful tool.
Just a point of clarification there, you mentioned videos on PowerShell, not videos, but there are 2 blogs.
Oh yes, sorry.
No, that's okay, where Pierre has put up the actual PowerShell scripts and commandments that you can download and just modify for your own use. So that's available on our website on the blog.
Yep, and if you follow us on Twitter, you'll find out when we actually post additional ones. You know, there's always little tidbits and things that I've come across doing deployments that could be useful. Definitely, yeah, there's a thousand things you can do with PowerShell. All right, so let me take us back to our presentation. Put there.
By the way, you shared with the audience a little shot of you canoeing.
Oh, really?
So that was great. They got to know your outdoorsman side.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, there we go. We're back. So that's our load. And okay.
Okay, great. So great session. I hope you have been making some notes and you'll be able to send us some questions that we can answer for you afterwards. Just to summarize, so Pierre talked about the 5 fundamental ITAM success factors, and today the focus was on data, but it's very important to remember that to get to that place of available and accurate data, you have the dependencies on the other 5 success factors to get there. So they're all interdependent, and you have to look at these things all in parallel and advance them together. Reality check. Where you are in ITAM maturity is fundamental to how you're going to succeed in any component, whether it's ITAM or software asset management. So you have to be able to know where you're standing. We do offer a fixed cost assessment program that will help you put some perspective on where you are and so that you're not setting objectives that you can't reach. So take a look at that on our website. You can find that off of the front page. And then once you know where you're at, then you can think about the data that would be important to manage based on where you're at and the type of asset that you're trying to manage. So break it down. It's to be successful in ITAM, you really have to break it down into reasonable bits that you can succeed with. Oh yeah, questions, right. Okay, so we had a few questions come up, and I'm going to throw them out to Pierre, and then he'll answer them. You haven't even seen these yet.
No, I haven't. You're going to put me on the spot.
I am. Okay, so one of the questions was, how much of data management is the responsibility of the ITAM manager versus IT?
Oh, good question. That is actually a really good question. One of the, we kind of talked about at the beginning of the session where we talked about roles and who's responsible for what. Well, asset management, IT asset management is responsible for identifying what properties they want to keep track of because they are tied to the objectives, and those are IT asset management objectives. IT are whether they know it or not, they are part of the IT asset management practice, and they, from a practice point of view, they then become more the feet on the street who are using the information and maybe even updating and providing feedback on the accuracy of the information. So the ownership is definitely ITAM, but IT is involved. Great.
Okay, second question, and this is from Tom in Ohio on here. Okay, let me read it for you. Okay, I'm slow on the gun. Okay, how do you track which tool, if you have multiple tools providing data, may supply data to your ITAM system? My guess is you would want to know if there are any gaps in coverage.
Okay, yeah. The goal is to have a central repository where you have all the information you need from an asset management point of view. Part of audit is also identifying the data that's missing. So when it comes down to the audit, then you can then realize why am I not getting this information and where am I lacking in coverage. The reality is information will be coming from multiple sources, right? Whether it's from the vendor, from your discovery tool or multiple discovery tools, whether it's from a barcode solution that's feeding information as well. I guess the objective there is to vet your sources, realize which ones you trust, which ones are source of truth, and which ones are maybe complementary information.
And hopefully do that before your populating the database.
Yeah, you're doing that.
Try to do that ahead of time.
Yeah,
right?
you are doing that when you're realizing that, yes, I want this data and this is how I'm going to use it.
Right. So if you're doing that ahead of time, then it should be part of your process to track what tools are.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then your audits will tell you where you're lacking in coverage.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, great. So last question that we thought would be useful for the audience today. We had someone ask, you know, if I haven't really begun in managing this data, what do you recommend as a starting point if I don't have anything in place today?
Well, yeah, it's down to the basics. It's doing a maturity assessment, understand where you are, and probably you're at chaotic or at that first stage. The second one is then to realize, you know, the success factors and your objectives. Again, data is not the only place to start. So, you know, do you have organizational commitment? Do you have people that are ready to take on that role? Is that organizational commitment also in support of putting in place processes and procedures? You know, if you have processes and procedures and they're not supported, then they're toothless tigers, right? There's not much you can do with them. So yeah, where to start is definitely understand your maturity level, define your objectives, then start looking at the key success factors and addressing them.
And I think the organizational commitment doesn't necessarily have to be, now you need to go to the CIO's office and get some significant funding. It might be organizationally within your department. What kind of support can you get to do things that you can control today and build up over time, right? So,
yeah, they would represent the different stakeholders.
Right.
So they're different stakeholders at different level, and they have objectives. But you'll quickly find out or find that, you know, everyone is interested in saving money, obviously, within an organization. So the objectives will be far-reaching. Yeah.
That's a good point around the business case for ITAM is strong. So we do have many more resources. I think there are 3 other videos up right now and the blog posts, etc. So if you visit the resources section of our website, there'll be some more information that will help you immediately.